So what's the difference between a 200mm lens and a 300mm lens, other than the obvious size? Well, that's the question I was asking myself. You know, a lot of these videos that we do are really in response to questions that we're asking ourselves, we're asking each other, trying to figure things out, and we figure we'll do a video about it. So just recently I decided to switch my camera system over from DSLR to mirrorless, and in the process of that I'm really reevaluating all of my gear, finding things that I just don't use anymore, things that I don't need anymore, and looking for maybe replacements in the RF mirrorless system that are coming along that I can eventually get and replace my old EF based stuff. So in evaluating my lenses, you know, one of the ones that came up was my 300mm 2.8 lens. This is really one of my favorite lenses of all time, but it's big, it's heavy. I don't use it as much as I should use it because it's really an amazing lens. So I asked the question, do I really need this lens? What am I getting out of it? And if not, can I replace it with something else? So when I first mentioned it to Bill, he basically said, you're crazy. That's a unique lens, keep it. You don't want to get rid of that. So I said, if I don't have that lens, if I don't have the 300mm 2.8 lens, what would I use? Well, I have the 70-200 zoom that has the 200mm 2.8 focal length that maybe I could use that instead. So I just wanted to see what the difference was in perspective and framing and background blur between these two different focal lengths on these two lenses. So I just set up, I did a quick shot here. I'll show you what this looks like. This is basically a tightly framed detail shot with the background a little bit blurred. I was about 15 feet away from the subject. The background is about 2 feet behind that. I shot it wide open at 2.8, and you know, just so you can see what this looks like here. So then I said, if I don't have this lens, if I don't have the 300mm 2.8 lens, what would I use? I would use the long end of my 70-200 zoom. So I left the camera in the exact same place. I switched lenses. So now here's the shot, the same exact shot taken with the 200mm focal length instead. And you can see what a difference it is in the field of view between these two lenses. You really aren't getting the reach. You really aren't getting in as tight with the 200 as you are with the 300. But of course not, they're different focal lengths. So what would I then do with an image like this? I would have to crop it to match the same framing as I did on the 300. So this next image here, you're gonna see is a tighter crop of the 200mm shot, cropped to match the 300mm framing. And everything really looks similar except for the background. The perspective is the same, the framing is the same, the bokeh, the background blur, just isn't quite the same as it is with the 300mm focal length. So I'll switch back to that one, you can see what that is. Switch back to the 200, you can see it's just not quite as nice. Not a huge difference, but maybe in some cases enough to make a difference. We talk about here a lot how you want to differentiate yourself from other photographers. And in doing that, you want to be able to look at the gear that you're using. Most photographers are shooting within the 24mm to 200mm focal range, covered across maybe 2 zooms, and the maximum aperture of about 2.8. So you want to get outside that range. So you want to shoot it wider than 24, maybe 15mm. If you're shooting in that range, you want to maybe shoot wider than 2.8. Get a 2.0 lens, get a 1.4 lens, and then maybe go longer than 200mm. 300, 400, 500 you can go if you want to carry that stuff around with you. But going outside that normal range is going to help set you apart from the other photographers. There's a lot of great photographers out there. So if you look at the difference between these two images, for me personally, it's enough of a difference. I'm willing to sacrifice to carry around that big heavy lens to get those kinds of shots, the shots that I really want to get, and not really compromise using the 200 and losing a little bit of that background blur. Now, I know what you're asking. You said, well, why don't you just get closer and frame it with the 200 the same way that you framed it with the 300? Well, in some cases you can't. You just can't get any closer because of physical barriers or whatever. You can't get any closer. But let's say that you can. So I'm going to move the camera about 5 feet closer to the subject and frame it up exactly the same way. So that's this image here is shot with a 200mm lens at 2.8. And now you can see there's actually less of a difference as far as the background goes. The background blur on this image now is very, very similar to the one on the 300mm 2.8 lens. So there's really not much of a difference at all. The difference really is going to be in the perspective, in the interaction between the background and the subject. You can see there's a difference here, and with a longer focal length, like 300 and beyond, the background elements are going to appear larger compared to the subject than you would with a shorter focal length. So I really just have one example here. I was going to go out and shoot a whole bunch outdoors, but it's like 100 degrees out today, so I just shot this one inside. But when you're out in the field and you're trying to get images and you're really working with the interaction between all these different elements between your foreground, your background, your main subject, and all of the things that are in your frame, the perspective really does matter a lot. And it really changes, even between 200 millimeters and 300 millimeters. The perspective is going to change, the framing is going to change, and the interaction of all those elements is going to look different on those two focal lengths. So yes, you could use the 200 millimeter 2.8 lens, maybe the long end of the focal range on a zoom lens. You can use that as your longest telephoto lens. You'll get similar images as you would with the 300, especially if you can physically get closer to your subject, but it's not going to be quite the same. You're not going to get quite the same background blur. You're not going to get the same perspective as you would if you use a more unique lens like the 300. But still, both amazing lenses. I hope you found that interesting. I know I did. I answered some questions for myself. I'm going to put links here to both the reviews I did on the 300 millimeter lens and the 70-200 zoom lens. Both great lenses. I'll put links in the description below. You can check those out on Amazon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.